So, dear Anne, let's dive right in and start with definitions. How would you define a spiritual, or as Jung would say, a numinous experience?
It is something that happens unexpectedly, unusually, out of the blue. It may happen in a dream. It might be a visionary dream, or it might be something that just happens to people as they're walking along the street or cooking the lunch or whatever. It's a sudden insight comes, a sudden opening of the door into another dimension. And then they may hear a voice, or they may even speak with that voice, whatever it might be, or it may be a message, a direct message telling them to do this or that. I can't really define it because it's very broad. There are many kinds of spiritual experiences that people have had. Many people have them when they go out into nature, in the woods. And like David Attenborough, he says, go and just sit in nature and you will hear and see things that you didn't hear or know before. So on many levels, you get this experience of a deepening consciousness or an opening consciousness to another reality, or a deeper reality than the one we're living in, or seeing deeper into this reality, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. So in your book, The Dream of the Cosmos, you share your dream of the cosmic woman as a profound dream and guiding experience for your life's journey and research. Would you say this was a religious or spiritual or sacred experience? Maybe you can tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. No question about it, because I've never had a dream like that before or since. It was definitely something coming to me from the universe, which I took as a message telling me what I needed to do. And it had nothing to do whatsoever with the religion, with Christianity, which I was brought up in. It was a vision of a cosmic woman, possibly the way people in the past have had a vision, like Abilius had a vision of Isis, for example. It was that kind of experience, completely out of the ordinary, completely revelatory and visionary. It was a vision.
And what would you say that made this kind of give this numinous feeling to it in relationship perhaps to other dreams or experiences of a feminine figure that may have inspired you? So could you define the difference?
The difference is that it was a vision of a woman that I couldn't associate with any specific goddess. I thought, is this Demeter? Is it Aphrodite? Is it Isis? But none of those fitted what I was seeing. So it came absolutely unexpectedly out of the blue. And eventually I associated with the feminine aspect of God, not in the Christian tradition, but in Kabbalah, because I was led to that tradition. And the Shekinah of Kabbalah was the only image or the only word that fitted power of that experience. Yeah. It wasn't a goddess. It was something far beyond a goddess. It was the universe itself speaking in feminine mode.
Yeah. So it did, in a way, eventually lead you to a lost religious tradition, one could say.
Well, it isn't really lost, but it's one that isn't very well known in the West. In the West, we're more familiar with Christianity. I think Jewish people know of it, possibly, if they're interested, if they're drawn to the mystical aspect of their own religion, they will know about it. And it's taught all over the world. And I had a teacher in England called Warren Kenton years ago, whom I studied with. So it's not something that's unknown, but it's something that isn't well known, put it that way.
In your book, basically, you show the reader throughout the book how the loss of the lunar participation mystique and this shamanic connection to nature and the feminine has damaged the very fabric of life and the world's soul. Do you think that this disrespect and violence against the feminine and nature has also distorted and ruined the inner images of feminine deity and our ability to experience her in these more elevated or divine images?
Well, I think that for Christians, they have the Virgin Mary to fulfill a certain aspect of the divine feminine, but they certainly have lost the feminine aspect of deity. All the patriarchal religions have lost that. And it was that connected us to nature, because the ancient goddesses, particularly goddesses like Isis and Artemis of Ephesus, represented not only nature, but the whole of the cosmos. And this is something we've completely lost. We have no connection with the cosmos. We may have connection through the Virgin Mary with an image, but she is not deity, and she's not the feminine aspect of the divine, as far as I can understand. Although she has been raised to that in the Catholic religion in 1950 and 1954, she was raised to the level of the male deity. Mm-hmm. But people don't know about that. They don't know about that papal bull in 1950 and the encyclical of 1954, which made her Queen of Heaven. Yeah. So she has restored to her the ancient title that Isis held, yeah, Queen of Heaven, and also Inanna before her was Queen of Heaven. So that does help, but still a big thing is missing, which is the connection to nature. Mm-hmm. And also the sacredness of nature, that has gone completely and needs to be brought back.
Yeah, because in the Christian thought, there's still the elevation of the heavens above nature. So when she is put up into heavens, the question is she then detached from earth and seen as above it?
Well, she was taken up body and soul. So body was included there, but not the whole of nature.
Yeah.
So you really have to go into the theology of it, I think, to understand it better. But on the other hand, the Pope Francis, in his encyclical of 2015, he absolutely rescued nature from the oblivion in which it has existed for a very long time. He restored it to its sacredness, and that was a tremendous thing to do. And I'm really tremendously grateful to him for doing that. It's a long encyclical, but it's full of wisdom and full of reproach that we have neglected our relationship with nature and haven't treated it properly. So he understands at a deep level what's happened.
Yes, so what I wonder is, if I look at the experience that you had, or maybe more modern experiences, experience that I've had as well, is that do we need these inner images of the feminine so that we are able to even perceive her? The question is, if all these images have been wiped out, where does our imagination find space to receive these images of her? So that's what I'm wondering, if her wiping out of her sacred texts and her temples has also damaged our imagination and ability.
Yes, I think I would absolutely agree with that. It has damaged the imagination. That's a very good phrase, because we have no image that we can connect with, which brings nature and the cosmos into one figure, one divine figure. So we haven't got anything that we can start with, as it were. We have to go just finding, like I have with these ancient descriptions of visions that people had. That has been a great help. And I put them into my book, The Divine Feminine. I brought the vision of Abilius there, of Isis. And of course, people did have visions, much more visionary experiences. The Egyptians certainly did. The Greeks certainly did. The Sumerians did. So really, we're a culture that is bereft of visionary experience.
Yeah.
It's missing. So there isn't anyone who can say, oh, so-and-so had a vision of something the other day. We can all discuss this and share it and pass it around through the internet. There is in Marion Woodman's work, there are dreams that she brings of the Black Madonna that people have had.
Yeah.
So that was something for Jungians would know about, for instance, but nobody outside the Jungian circles would know that people were having these visions of the Black Madonna. And if I hadn't put my vision into my book, nobody would know of my vision, which was a tremendous vision which changed my life, absolutely.
Yeah, so these images of the feminine that are retrieved and restored and shared, they actually can start to heal the damaged imagination and
Yes, they could. And possibly if we listen to children who might have visions of the Virgin Mary, which indeed they've had, they have been paid attention to. And the visions of Fatima in Portugal and Medjugorje in Yugoslavia, they've been recorded. So there has been something, but it hasn't spread beyond the Catholic, the Catholic population.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So that brings us to the second part of the interview, which I've divided in three parts. It's about the importance of experiencing God or deity as feminine. So firstly, what do you think the importance is for a woman to experience God as feminine?
Well, I think it's very important because then she can understand, as I did, that she is made in the image of the divine feminine. Yeah. She can see her body as a manifestation of the divine feminine in this dimension of experience, this material dimension of experience. So I think it would be a tremendous help if she had one like I did, or other women have had them perhaps we don't know about. It's a tremendous anchor in a world where we really don't know what we're doing or why we're here.
Yeah. And for a man, what do you think the importance is for a man to experience this feminine side of deity?
I think it's equally important for a man because men have been brought up with the monotheistic image of God for nearly 3,000 years, or 2,500 years if you include the Judaic tradition. That's a long time to be imprinted with the image of only a male God or the male aspect of deity. So I think it's absolutely essential that men also have this experience of the feminine aspect of deity, and that it is numinous for them and almost shocking that this is something that they've neglected, and they haven't realized that they carry this feminine aspect of life within their own nature, what Jung called the anima. They have the anima within their nature.
So you say shocking? Why do you say shocking?
Well, it would be a shock to many men to discover that this is a sacred image, and they'd never thought of it before in that way, possibly. Yeah. And so it's shocking in the sense that it's unusual, strange, different.
Yeah. That it evokes something.
And it will stir something in them, or get them to ask questions, possibly, or make a relationship with this image. Mm-hmm. And ask that image what it wants of them. Why has it appeared to them?
Yeah. So there have been men in the past, as you shared with me before, that have had these experiences. Maybe would you like to talk about one of them in particular that has touched you? Or?
Well, they've all touched me, really. First of all, there's a very ancient one, 2000 BC, of a king in Sumeria who had a dream, and he went to the temple of the goddess and asked the goddess to give him the explanation of the dream, and she gave it to him, and she told him that he was to build a temple. And in the dream, he had an image of a donkey carrying material for building, and she said, "The donkey is you. You're carrying the material, but you're to go and build a temple to my brother, the god Ningusu," what she was. So that was a lovely dream to come down all this time, and that's recorded in Joseph Campbell's book, Occidental Mythology. Mm-hmm. He's a fantastic chronicler of history, Campbell, so one always finds something there. And then there was Apuleius' vision of Isis, and Apuleius was an Egyptian that was living in the 2nd century of the Christian era, who lived, I think, in Rome, who is an initiate of the mysteries of Isis. And he writes this, such a beautiful description. He writes, "The apparition of a woman began to rise from the middle of the sea with so lovely a face that the gods themselves would have fallen down in adoration of it. First the head, then the whole shining body gradually emerged and stood before me, poised on the surface of the waves. Her long, thick hair fell in tapering ringlets on her lovely neck, and was crowned with an intricate chaplet in which was woven every kind of flower. Just above her brow shone a round disk like a mirror, or like the bright face of the moon, which told me who she was. Vipers rising from the left hand and right hand partings of her hair supported this disc, with ears of corn bristling beside them. Her many-colored robe was of the finest linen. Part was glistening white, part crocus yellow, and part glowing red. And along the entire hem, a woven border of flowers and fruit clung swaying in the breeze. But what caught and held my eye more than anything else was the deep black luster of her mantle. She wore it slung across her body from the right hip to the left shoulder, where it was caught in a knot resembling the boss of a shield, but part of it hung in innumerable folds, the tasseled fringe quivering. It was embroidered with glittering stars on the hem and everywhere else, and in the middle beamed a full and fiery moon. On her divine feet were slippers of palm leaves, the emblem of victory. And these are the words that she spoke to him. I am nature, the universal mother, mistress of all the elements, primordial child of time, sovereign of all things spiritual, queen of the dead, queen also of the immortals, the single manifestation of all gods and goddesses that are. My nod governs the starry heights of heaven, the wholesome sea breezes, and the dreadful silence of the world below. Though I am worshipped in many aspects and known by countless names and propitiated with all manner of different rites, yet the whole round earth venerates me. Now that was something. If you had a vision like that, what would you do?
I know. I mean, this is like, this blows one's mind on so many levels. It's
yeah, and she speaks as a cosmic
authority, really.
Authority, total authority. The whole round earth venerates me. She's no mean little tiny goddess there. She's
no, and she's not bound to the earth. I mean, she is the axis of creation here.
Exactly, she is. She speaks from the divine center of the universe, really, and manifested. And what it did to him is very funny. What she told him to do, because he was in the form of an ass at this time when he had the vision, and he was very worried that he'd never go back to his human form. And she told him to go and stand in the procession and to watch the high priest, who would have a garland of roses. He would be carrying a garland of roses. And Abilius was to rush up to the priest and take a big bite out of the garland of roses. And if he did that, he would be changed back into his mortal form. So he did this. And of course, he changed back naked completely, and he had to be covered with a cloak. But he describes the bliss of chewing these rose petals and feeling himself change back from an ass into a human being, into a man. I mean, that was so thrilling and so exciting and described so beautifully in his book that one can't help laughing, because it must have been a very funny spectacle. And the high priest was horrified and shocked and then amazed at what was happening in front of him. And all the people in the crowd were stunned. You know, I mean, what an experience for everybody. Anyway, that's one.
The sense of humor in it is quite, I think, also it says something about the nature of the goddess. This sense of humor that's
very grounded. It's very grounded, absolutely grounded. And then there's the vision of Boethius. Do you want me to talk about that one?
Yeah, I was wondering, maybe just there was one thing in this vision that I thought maybe we could speak about what you thought was meaning. Let me see. Yeah, he really, the description of her finest the linen, the glistening white, the crocus, it's all very sensuous.
It is.
Yeah.
And very, very vivid, and you can almost touch it. You can feel the quality of the robe, the finest linen of the robe, and then her black overmantle.
Exactly. And that really, this creates the senses, really. It brings the senses and the imaginations to life. When one reads a vision like that, it does something to the senses internally, as if flowers are popping out of one's imagination.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And with the vipers supporting this disc above her head and everything, and that's very brilliant imagery, very, very careful description, really. And it's exciting for the body to be included, because it's about the bodily form of the flowers and nature.
Yeah.
Everything is included there. Nothing is left out. And then she's even got glittering stars on the hem.
Exactly. And the feet of her, and she's from bottom to top. She is endowed in sacred senses. This is really, and I think that if we speak of loss of images and the damage that is done to our imagination, if the senses and the body and the earth has always been condemned as a place of evil, whereas if you read this, well, there's nothing evil about this.
No, there's nothing fallen, nothing sinful, nothing bad about this at all. This is glorious.
Glorious, exactly.
Glorious. And that really excites the imagination, because the imagination is part of all this.
Yeah.
Be able to describe that is coming from this man's imagination, and he's seeing it with his imagination, if you like.
Yeah.
And I think there's a wonderful alchemical saying, imagination is the star in man. Beautiful saying.
Yeah, that is a beautiful saying.
So if we remember, it really is our starry body, possibly, our imagination.
Yes, I like that. So please go on in the next, you wanted to share the next experience.
Yeah, well, the next one is quite different. It comes from a wonderful scholar called Boethius, who lived at the beginning of the 6th century of the Christian era. And he had been taken prisoner by a barbarian emperor called Theodoric, and he was waiting in a cell for his execution. And he was very depressed, as you would be if you were waiting your execution. And he was crying, I think, and mourning that his life was coming to an end. And then suddenly he says this manuscript, it was called The Consolation of Philosophy, and God knows how it got out of that prison cell intact, because it's 5 whole books of writing. I mean, it's a lot of writing. Anyway, he says this: while I was quietly thinking these thoughts over to myself and giving vent to my sorrow with the help of my pen, I became aware of a woman standing over me. She was of an awe-inspiring appearance, her eyes burning and keen beyond the usual power of men. She was so full of years that I could hardly think of her as my own generation, and yet she possessed a vivid color and undiminished vigor. It was difficult to be sure of her height, for sometimes she was of average human size, while at other times she seemed to touch the very sky with the top of her head. And when she lifted herself even higher, she pierced it and is lost to human sight. Her clothes were made of perishable material, of the finest thread, woven with the most delicate skill. And later she told me that she had made them with her own hands. Their color was obscured, however, by a kind of film, as if of long neglect, like statues covered in dust. On the bottom hem could be read the embroidered Greek letter pi, and on the top hem, the Greek letter theta. Between the two, a ladder of steps rose from lower to the higher letter. Her dress had been torn by the hands of marauders who had each carried off such pieces as he could get, and there were some books in her right hand, and in her left hand she held a scepter. Tears had partly blinded me, and I could not make out who this woman of such imperious authority was. I could only fix my eyes on the ground, overcome with surprise, and wait in silence for what she would do next. She came closer and sat down on the edge of my bed, and I felt her eyes resting on my face, which was downcast and lined with grief. And she began to speak to him at great length, explaining things that were perplexing him, really going deep into philosophy, which he was a philosopher, and explaining why evil exists, for example. I can't go into it, it's too long because there are 5 books. But this book had a tremendous influence on the sort of so-called Dark Ages, and his book was particularly valued by Charlemagne, for example, and Charlemagne's court. So this is another visionary experience, just when he perhaps expected nothing except a jailer coming to fetch him for execution. And he had this marvelous vision, which was so powerful that it influenced 300 or 400 years of people who were searching for wisdom themselves. And she was, she's called Philosophia, but really she is Sophia, or divine wisdom. That's who she was, speaking to him.
An amazing, amazing vision again, amazing image. And
Very powerful vision. And again, it says that her dress had been torn by the hands of marauders.
yes,
So at his time, she'd fallen into, nobody really bothered anymore with wisdom.
covered in dust.
Covered in dust, like statues covered in dust. And yet her robe was woven with the most delicate skill. So there again, you get the imagination working, and you get the physical image and the touch of the material, almost like you did in the Apuleius vision.
Mm-hmm.
It's very real, very present. And many artists did pictures of it, which got into the books of hours and things like that. So I think I've always loved that. I've known about that since I was 20. And I was looking all through my bookshelves for the book, and it's a very small penguin book that looks like this.
That's amazing. Yeah, I will look into this vision as well. It's extraordinary. I think I was wondering what you thought of what he meant by that she said she made it with her own hands. I thought that was so touching.
Well, she would do if she is this divine wisdom, she would be making the fabric of life, including her own robe.
Yeah.
Yeah, she would be doing that.
And I like that, because if we think of the idea of God as man, the creator who created the feminine, here she says, I created it with my own hands.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And that goes counter to that idea of God, the creator, as goddess, the creatrix, even of her own robe.
Of her own robe, yes. That's very clever of you to pick that up. That's good. Anyway, these are tremendous visions, and they lasted for a very long time. I think Boethius had his about 300 years after Apuleius, not very long, really. And then we have a great gap, really. And right away, we have Hildegard of Bingen in the Christian tradition, and we have the people like the Beguines, people who had withdrawn from society and were really mystics. And we have Jakob Boehme, who was an incredible visionary. Yes, I didn't know until I listened to the embassy, a very brilliant woman who I think is in charge of the books, explaining what happened to Boehme's works, that they were rescued by a man in the Netherlands who copied the manuscripts word for word and manuscript by manuscript and saved all his work, which would have been destroyed. So it was thanks to a man in the Netherlands, I can't remember his name, I think it began with a B, who rescued Boehme's great works.
Yeah.
And imagine him copying them day after day, month after month.
Yeah.
It's almost the labor of love that it must have been.
Yeah, that's kind of taking the dust off that image, isn't it, as well?
Absolutely, yes. And he had a vision of Sophia. That was his great focus of his writing, was, again, the feminine aspect of divinity. Although he may not have called her that. I really don't know enough about Boehme to say that.
I wanted us for a moment to look at these images, to look at these experiences in a historical sort of framework, or more like a playful way, because obviously these are not all the experiences humanity has had of the feminine deities, but these are interesting experiences that you've chosen to share with us, also because they are in these different times and these different historical moments. And for example, the last one that we just discussed of Boethius is really where the image is in a decline. It is dusted. There's a grief that comes over him. We could say that this is, as we mentioned, this is a time where the feminine Sophia was in decline. She was already fallen, so to say. When we go back, the image of Isis, of Apuleius, she was in her full glory. There was nothing sinful or fallen about her. And the first one as well, there is this authority of the goddess. It wasn't out of the ordinary to receive a vision of a goddess back then. It wasn't for everyone. Not everyone would have visions of goddess, I imagine, but it wasn't also something to be questioned in that way, I could imagine.
Yeah, it was expected and anticipated that people would have these visions, and that he would be told to build a temple in
and that he would.
Visionary dream.
Yeah. And then later it becomes with Apuleius, it's almost as if she's in her she's really in one of her most glorified images. And that might have been around the tipping point. I don't know what time was that place again.
It was about the where was it? Yes, it was the second century of the Christian era, probably around 180, something like that.
So that would be the time that the image starts to decline, really.
Well, probably because it began to be covered up by the Roman gods and goddesses, and also by Christianity.
Yeah, exactly. And then by the time Boethius in this image, he's overcome with the grief as well.
He was able to write it all down, which is incredible.
Amazing imagery.
And also that he had enough parchment or whatever it was that they gave him to write, that he was allowed to write it down, and that somebody saved it. That's an incredible thing too. When he was killed, somebody saved that manuscript.
5 books. I don't even know how that would be possible, as you say. But this is
it fills this whole little book here. I can't remember how many pages. It's 165 pages.
So that brings me to another question, which is also related to especially the influence that his vision of Sophia had. What do you think that the importance of experiencing this feminine side of deity is on a culture as a whole, or on a specific era, for instance?
Well, for instance, I'm thinking about the Cathars of the southwest of France in the 12th and 13th century. Their guiding image was Sophia as well. I don't know whether they had any visions of her, but the church was called the Church of the Holy Spirit, which is the Church of Sophia. And the troubadours took that teaching all over Europe in the 12th century, to every country in Europe, because in the beginning of the 12th century, nobody had heard of the Grail, for instance. And at the end of the century, nobody existed who didn't know about the Grail. So they took, the Grail was a symbol of the Church of the Holy Spirit, which gave out love to everyone, gave out the food that was needed by everybody to everybody. So that was a small cultural phenomenon, if you like, because it was wiped out by the Catholic Church and by the Inquisition. And the Catholic Church had such power right the way from then until the 20th century, really, or the 19th century, that it was able to keep this tradition of Sophia absolutely underground, because it came up again with Jacoberma, it came up again with the Rosicrucians in the 17th century. You can follow the thread right the way from the 13th century up to the 18th or 19th century, but underground. The whole thing was underground because of the Inquisition. It couldn't be brought up into the full consciousness of the culture. So Christian culture has been missing the divine feminine from the point of view of the Godhead right the way through. And that, I think, is an utter tragedy and is responsible for the mess that we're in now.
And the importance of the keeping alive that these secret or hidden traditions did, because we might oversee that this underground preserving of the image. Really, it really is almost like an underground museum, keeping the images alive, even if it were a few people who still would be part of the movement. I think that is also really important.
Yes, and also the alchemists were part of this whole underground movement, because their guiding divinity, if you like, was Sophia also.
Yeah.
So they took that on from the Cathar Church. It carried on right the way through European history. And it came out later on in what came in Hildegard of Bingen, for instance. But she couldn't speak the full truth, because it would have been heresy to have said what she might have seen in her vision. But she couldn't actually speak about it. She had to keep it to herself.
Yeah, exactly.
But we have the great vision of wisdom that she had there in the Skyrias. And then we come on to the Russian sophiologists, which is very interesting, which I really didn't know about until I read this book called Sophia by someone who's become a friend of mine.
Her name is
Schaub.
Yes.
Yes, I think she lives, I can't remember where I met her. I think it was in Germany. But anyway, she wrote this marvelous book, which I recommend to everybody. And she brings the Russian visionaries, which I didn't know about before. who were quite extraordinary, really. And one of them, here again, it's coming back. The Russian church has always worshipped Sophia. It's always had an image in the great churches and in the icons of Sophia as a great angel, actually. Right in the apse of some of the churches, she's shown as the angel, really, of the apocalypse almost. Anyway, she is as Sophia. And this man, Solofiev, who lived from 1853 to 1900, he had a vision of Sophia at the age of 9. And again, at the age of 20, in the British Library, when he was looking at books, he suddenly had this vision of her again. And a final one in Egypt, of all places, where he went out into the night in sort of distress, looking for her, and fell asleep or fell unconscious and had a vision of her while he was lying there. And she revealed to him, he says, the abundance of the Godhead, the eternal one. And that vision was never to leave him. And later he described his 3 visions of Sophia in a long poem. And he paid homage to her as his eternal friend, the mistress of the earth. It's a lovely title, Mistress of the Earth, the woman of the apocalypse, and the Queen of Heaven. So there you have a trilogy of marvelous images of Sophia. And I wish we could bring Sophia back into our lives, really, as guiding us now in our return to nature and our return to respect for the life of the planet.
She's also connected there, interestingly, to the apocalypse.
Yeah, she's the woman clothed with the sun, with a circle of stars around her head.
Yeah, but what an amazing, the mistress of the earth?
Mistress of the earth, the woman of the apocalypse, and Queen of Heaven.
Heaven, yeah. What would that? What a trinity! Mystery of the earth, woman, the apocalypse,
and the Queen of Heaven.
Heaven.
So he saw her really as Apuleius saw Isis.
Yeah, exactly.
As the feminine principle guiding the whole cosmos.
Yeah, even
present within the whole cosmos, as the life of the cosmos. This is what they're saying. She is the life of the cosmos, which is extraordinary.
And here again, the importance of being brought up with the images, as he has been, if in the Russian
in
church,
Russia, yes.
The angel Sophia, then you see how important it is that she is represented, even if it's marginal.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, absolutely. Because every church he went into, he would have seen her, and he would have heard her prayers to her and things like that, with the priest saying these, and with beautiful music.
Yeah, exactly. And that, even if it serves as even a small anchor for these visions to sort of find us or hit a note within us when we do receive it. Because I think that a great loss of these images also creates, instead of revelations of the goddess, perhaps creates neuroses and psychoses for many people instead of being able to receive her.
Yes, because it's completely shut out. And this ghastly scientific belief that has been guiding Western culture for 300 years, which says that the whole thing is without any meaning, that the universe has no meaning, no end, no sort of consciousness, and that everything starts with our physical brain. That has been a disaster for the imagination. It really has, because although we've had marvelous images from the cosmos, from Hubble telescope, that we have that, thank God, which has stimulated the imagination and put us in touch with the cosmos again. But we have no image of deity connected with that. And that is a tragedy, really. And also we have no image of deity connected with the earth, with Mother Earth, like the indigenous people have always retained the image of Mother Earth.
Exactly. And
they pray to her and speak to her as a feminine image.
So there's a question that relates to that I had written down is, what do you think the influence on the psyche is and culture is when God is referred to as he with capital H, and perhaps only as she with capital S when it's spoken as earth or nature? Because in your vision, you experience the cosmic woman in the starry cosmos in the heavens, and the heavens have traditionally been this place of he, the bearded man sitting on a cloud. And I know in my own experience, as well as the women that in my practice, that when they have a vision of the feminine in the cosmos, the feminine being the she with capital S in the sky, it's a huge difference for the psyche. And it's almost unknown, because it has always been he in the culture that we've been brought up, and God has always been referred to as he. And to the most, it's been Mother Nature with a capital S.
Well, it's very interesting that the Our Father prayer was originally in Aramaic, and Jesus, or Yeshua as he was called in Aramaic, would have spoken the words which were to the mother father of the cosmos, not the father, but in Aramaic, the word used to the deity or the great being, as it were, was mother father. And of course, mother got lost.
Yeah.
So we've come down as Our Father, which art in heaven, instead of Our Mother Father or Our Father Mother, whichever way you want to put it around. We've lost that feminine element right there in the very biggest, important prayer. And then in Aramaic, it would have been utterly different, because the feeling would have been different and the imagination would have been different. The image would have been utterly different. And the Aramaic language is very rich, and it goes on for much longer than the Lord's Prayer, the actual prayer in Aramaic. And it's full of the imagery of nature and the cosmos and everything else, really. So it included everything. And it worries me a bit that Earth is associated with the mother as Earth only instead of the cosmos.
Exactly.
And because it excludes the all and the entirety of the all. And this is what Soloviev understood, that she revealed to him the eternal one, which is both male and female.
Yes.
And this is what we have to get back somehow. And I think I will read out for you her saying, shall I, that you thought was so striking about the importance of having the feminine?
Yes, please.
She says this: as long as the feminine is not located in the Godhead itself, as long as it is subservient to God the Creator, Sophia cannot act from divine empowerment in her own right. The sacred wedding has to take place within the deity, as Hildegard saw but dared not say.
Yeah.
So there we have it, really. That is the key to everything. We have to restore the image of both to deity.
Otherwise, she will still remain submissive to he as the ultimate Godhead, and she is just creation or just...
Exactly, yeah. She'll only be associated with the created world, but not with the invisible world, the divine world.
Yes, and I think that is really disempowering for the feminine.
It is, you're right, absolutely dead right. It's disempowering, and my work has been to bring back the feminine, and yours is as well. So, we're working together on this same goal, as it were.
Yeah.
I had a dream last night.
Oh.
Yes, which was that a man and woman had come to stay, bringing a baby with them, and they were in a sort of guest suite or something, and they got up earlier than when I was ready to sort of receive them. And then they were in a car later on. The mother and the father had gone off shopping. I was there with the mother and the baby, and the woman's handed me the baby, which was wrapped up in swaddling clothes, almost completely covered, and put it in my left arm. And I looked down at the baby. It was a little girl. And I said to it, "What a beautiful baby you are."
Oh.
So maybe this is the divine feminine coming back. It's still very infant. It wasn't more than a month old.
That's sweet. Yeah. And the man being off to do shopping. And
shopping.
Women. Yeah.
And she left me for a minute. She'd gone out as well and said, "Can you hold the baby while I just go and do something? I'll be back in a minute." And I was worried that I would be left holding the baby and she wouldn't come back for it.
It's beautiful.
But that ties in with today's talk without a question. So it's a lovely, lovely dream.
It's a lovely baby girl.
Baby girl, and dressed in white.
In white.
White, sort of lots of coverings, several layers of white coverings, with just her little head buried in the covering, so to speak, like a hood.
It's almost like a cocoon.
Yes, it was like a cocoon. That's right. That's Yeah.
Sweet, sweet image. Well, I also think this is kind of the question where I wanted to go, is that if humanity is needed, as the alchemists say, the final stage of alchemy is rubedo, is redeeming the cosmos, it's redeeming the Godhead itself. So if not only the Godhead the human being needs the Godhead, but also the Godhead needs the human being to experience itself, to know itself.
That's right. This is what Jung said.
Exactly.
Yeah, he understood that man has to grow up to God, but God needs man's help in discovering who he is, or who she is.
Who she is, yeah, who she is. Yeah, so this is the idea, is that if the Godhead can experience itself as her, then maybe that will, as your friend Suzanne writes in her book, Sophia, maybe that can restore the incredible disbalance that we are experiencing, because it's the Godhead itself that is missing this experience, or that has lost the experience.
Yes, I think that you put your finger on a very, very important point, and I hope this comes through, because if that's missing, if the Godhead doesn't know herself, himself, to be the wholeness that we hope she could be, how on earth are we going to change anything on the planet?
Exactly, yes. So here it brings us back again to this, I like this idea. I mean, this is what I live by with the Sufism, is it's not for us, it's for the sake of the beloved. So for the sake of the beloved, which is also the sake of this world and everything in it, we retrieve this experience of the Godhead itself as feminine, so that everything may come into balance.
Yeah, because it's important to restore the balance. That's the most important thing. And Jung saw this as enantiodromia, impossible word, but he says when the pendulum has swung too far one way, it's got to come back to the middle. This is what we need to do, bring it back to the focus of the center.
Yeah. So maybe we should start calling the God, not goddess per se, but also her, God as her, the divine as her, and to bring back this language that has been.
Well, of course, in other languages, you would have had the ending of noun as feminine, which we haven't got in English.
Yeah.
So it's difficult. I mean, in French, you would say la déesse. You immediately have the feminine participle, or whatever it's called.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how the language will want to shift, but I see it also as important. I know when I read a book and God is constantly referred to as he, I get annoyed. It gets under my skin.
It's a habit. It's a habit, a 2,000-year-long habit.
Yeah.
And it can be changed, because it was changed before into the thing that we've got now. But we can do the sacred unity. We can do the sacred marriage, which I think is the most important image to hang on to.
Yeah. Him, her.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been most interesting for me to have somebody to share my thoughts with and to listen to your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anne. And I'm sure this is going to be of help to many men and women who are in search of this balance in their experience of the sacred. Thank you so much.